Hello. What's up, Paranormal Stephanie? I'm just getting everything set up and ready to go here. I got it set up on Hangouts because I may end up. What's up, Johnny? May end up with a guest. Depends. So I am going to get this shared and I'll be right back with you guys. Alrighty. Just about ready. What's up, Victoria? Dustin, thanks for coming. Alrighty. So I guess I will start off reading a story, I suppose. And I'll have to wait and see if my guest shows up, right? What up, Ken? Thanks for coming. If everybody could like and share and all that good stuff. Oh, that's excellent, Dustin. Good news. I'm glad to hear that. So how's everybody's weekend go? What's up, Horror Hive? Before I started this, I was working on the video for Friday for the Horror Hive. Johnny, I was just gonna read from this the creepypasta list. You don't need to send me anything, it's all good. Now just wait and see if Jack shows up or not and see if he still wants to do it, because I'm a little worried about Jack. Yeah, mine wasn't bad. Mine went all right. So I'll go ahead and I'll start reading this first story. Can you guys hear me okay? Ken, no. No, don't you ever send me anything. All right. So the first story is called The Cameras Could Take You Home. And it was written by S. Lane. S. Lane. Oh, your weekend was just okay, Paranormal Stephanie? Well, that's unfortunate that it wasn't better. All right, I'll start. Okay, let me make this easy by explaining how I did what I did, in layman's terms, of course. I like to experiment. Metals, wires, chemicals, those kind of things. I'm not super serious about it. I go to college for linguistics. I'm pretty normal. My favorite things to work with are things that the public aren't really supposed to get a hold of. I did a comparison via microscope of a Cuban cigar to one from Nicaragua and was actually able to spot some key differences. What I'm about to explain started with doing a search on Google Shopping. You search for something, it brings up all of the online locations where you can buy whatever it is, do price comparisons, etc. Me and my friend Dave were having fun looking up crazy things one night, like fighter jets and private islands. Things actually do come up. The prices are laughable. Anyway, I searched for uranium. To our surprise, a few sites popped up selling straight up fucking uranium. We laughed it off, but it made me think. I've heard that some of the more off the wall elements on the periodic table can do strange things. A few days later, I got paid for my silly phone bitch job and went and did the uranium search again. I chose a random vendor and started looking around their site. The only other wild one I found was Ununpentium, Ununpentium, element 114. if I remember right. I bought them both. Don't ask where the site is, and don't ask how much it cost. I'll explain everything. But to tell you the truth, no matter how much you probably think you want to see what I saw, it's an extremely hard reality to live with. I got these elements in vials. Working with them is not safe. I'm not going to tell you how I did it, but I found it on the internet, so you can too. I tried a few different things with small amounts of each, combining them in water, etc. There isn't a lot of information on unum pentium, as it's a man-made element. Nobody is supposed to have access to it outside of really extravagant laboratory settings. Anyway, surprisingly, nothing interesting happened. I had one more interesting idea. I put both in a food dehydrator. This sounds retarded, I know, believe me. The thought was hilarious to me too, since I bought the food dehydrator to extract mescaline from cactus I found at a Mexican grocery store. You wouldn't believe what college kids would pay, but never mind. Anyway, I put these two in the dehydrator and turned it on. This is when things got a little strange. I ran it for around 10 seconds and the two elements drew closer together, similar to how a magnet attracts metal. I ran it a little longer and now they moved yet closer. What happens when they touch in here? I ran it and watched. The two little stones I used drew closer, and they touched. The spot that each of them touched with the other began to shimmer a little bit. I kept going. They drew, well, into each other until they became one black shimmering mass. As I continued, the mass took on a perfect spherical shape. It grew from the size of a marble to about that of a baseball before I stopped. I took the thing out with a thick gloved hand and held it. It didn't seem to have any mass whatsoever. I decided to take a big risk. I set this thing down, and it literally hovered about 2 inches over my kitchen counter. Wow! I took off my right glove and touched the thing. It felt like sticking. It felt like sticking my fingers into jello, yet it was extremely warm. Inside? It was just a black ball of I don't know what. Once I stuck my right pointer finger in, I couldn't see the inside. I couldn't see it inside the thing. You can hold this with a hand, yet fingers go through it. I picked it up, no glove this time, and held it up to my eye. This is when everything happened. This is basically a recap. I can't tell you what happened during whatever happened. I can, however, tell you what I learned. Essentially, this thing took me to the future. I understood it to be the year 2060. Not all too crazy, but it was different. I had some time to look around. I'm going to number my experiences for you. 1. I saw how technology had advanced since 2013. I was placed into a public park. I'm not sure where, but everyone spoke English, so it was somewhere in the USA. I saw people taking pictures. Everyone still acts like they do today. There were some new slang terms, like what I guess was posh, which is some sort of agreeing. The cameras that people had were amazing. They essentially take pictures that you can move all around. Essentially, again, they capture the entire world in each moment in time. You can take a picture of something, bring the image up on the camera's touchscreen display, and you can start moving the picture around. People took pictures in the park, sat around the camera, and one person made motions on the screen with their fingers. The image began moving forward. They moved to an adjacent street. One of them moved the image to their house, where they saw their parents sitting in the living room. Every single thing happening in the moment that a picture had taken is captured in each picture. Well, it's really windy outside. Also, as a side note, I didn't recognize any of the logos on these things, so I'd say a big competitor is coming in the tech market. 2. Things began to get depressing at this realization. I listened to a news broadcast someone was watching on what reminded me of a tablet. It was a cool little thing that produced a 3D hologram when you sit it flat facing up. The 3D news person, a pretty woman who reminded me of Diane Neal during her Strawberry Blonde era, explained a list of new sanitation Yeah, sanitization locations through New York City, how innovative they were, and how a petition had been started to open these elsewhere. The pretty news lady explained that they were walk in decontamination booths. They looked like a phone booth, but were white with a green sign, like a medical cross with heat lines coming off it. The booth fills with an antibiotic gas that decontaminates the skin, lungs, and respiratory tract. From what I understood, things like this had been around for a while, and this was simply the newest antibiotic agent. See, what happened was viruses continued to morph, and pharma technology actually hit a 5 year standstill around 2045. Pharma was still trying to catch up, but viruses had a 5 year permanent head start now. And these boosts were the only way to ensure safety against these viruses that were, as of yet, untreatable. What up, Hell's House Paranormal? Stacy, thanks for coming. It was a sort of social more to enter one of these before visiting other. Okay, no, I read that right. It was a sort of social more to enter one of these before visiting others' homes, offices, etc. Real upstanding citizens wore these jelly bracelets with a little digital counter on them that showed how long it had been since they deconned. 3. As a quick side note, I've never cared too much about the environment. I have no problem with smokers, never really worried about doing my part to cut down on emissions and things like that. This isn't a political statement or anything like that, but something I learned while on my trip, I learned that Beijing, China was now abandoned. The air quality had devolved to the point where around 75 people began dying daily of respiratory infections. These were people whose health had been excellent. It only took around 3 hours of exposure to Beijing's air to put someone in the hospital. Eventually, the UN took over evacuating Beijing, giving it the same safety classification as Pripyat, the city of the Chernobyl disaster. It was estimated that with Beijing abandoned and technically at zero emissions now, it would be safe by the new clean air standards to be settled again at around 9,000 years. It is also said that Los Angeles and Pittsburgh will suffer the same fate in around 20 years or so, 2080, if drastic measures were not taken to eliminate pollution. You know, it struck me as odd that these places hadn't cut down on emissions to a reasonable level yet, because even today, in 2013, tons of clean air initiatives are in place aimed at factories and the like. Like I said, not meant to be a political statement or any Greenpeace bullshit. It's just what I saw. 4. An interesting side note, most of this information came from watching the news in 2060. I talked to some people, told them I was foreign to explain my accent and what was now old-timey choice of words. They explained that the USA government had passed an initiative holding news outlets to standards similar to advertisers. Any sort of embellishment, bias, or straight-up lie was punishable with fines in the millions. The public trusted the news media completely, and there wasn't really anything to suggest that the media couldn't be trusted, though I will say that the news was now quite boring and dry compared to 2013. Ha ha ha. I guess it's time to explain why this isn't a happy story about an amazing future, at least not for me. What's up, Mr. Bloom? Hello, Haley. I love you. And you are here. I seen you. 5. There's no easy way to say this, but in 2060, I'd been dead for 8 years. I'll explain how this is possible in a minute. I was almost 50 years into the future. Of course, I wanted to see what I was up to. I don't know for sure how much time I spent there. We switched to a 24-hour clock, by the way. But I eventually figured out that I was in Central Park in New York City. Real quick explanation. The thing that I created in my kitchen puts you in the area closest to you with the most energy. And nothing produces more energy than a bunch of active living humans. Path of least resistance, I guess. Anyway, believe it or not, I still had everything. My iPhone, now a fossil compared to the phones these people had, still worked. I still had a wallet with my credit and debit cards, now embarrassingly expired. I still had the money from my paycheck that I cashed. It took some time, but I made it to the rural upstate New York where my family lived. This part is very difficult for me to write. Please bear with me. What's up, Drac? I saw you. I saw their house. My parents were still alive, still married in their 90s. I looked in the window. Our living room was adorned with pictures of me, all stages of life. Above our fireplace hung the biggest one, a picture of a much older looking me with flowers and an urn sitting in the mantel underneath the picture. I couldn't handle this. I started crying. Inside, my parents sat in an amber colored couch, holding hands, looking at the picture above the mantel. I don't know if they were talking. This was the hardest thing I'd ever done in life. I made the decision to leave. My parents had accepted my death. I was here. I was given the opportunity of a lifetime to walk in as my 22-year-old self. I couldn't do it. There was too much that I felt could go wrong. Could a human handle such a thing? Seeing the 22-year-old version of their deceased son waltz in? It's physically impossible. I had that opportunity, but for the sake of everything I've ever known, I didn't do it. I learned that I died from a rare form of Parkinson's disease, which I suspected I had had at the age 21, and I was right. I inherited it from my maternal grandfather, who also died of it, though he was in his 70s. I got back home to 2013. Once again, I won't tell you how because I don't want anyone to have to experience what I did. I was in my kitchen. Strangely, no time at all had passed. I need to explain some things, of course. One, in this instance, my physical body went to the future. Time in 2013 did not move, therefore I have no idea how long I was gone. This wasn't a spiritual thing. My physical being went. I was still the exact same person in the same clothes, the same change in my back pocket as I had the night in 2013. Who puts their change in their back pocket? What's up, Mandy? Two, nothing you do in the future can change the present. This should go without saying, but the future hasn't happened yet, and 99.9% of people have no idea what is going to happen in 2060. Excuse me. Three, this is a big one. Nothing you do in the present can change the future, even if you know what is going to happen. Why? Because in my case, I knew what was going to happen. I realized that I'm not going to change my lifestyle or do anything different. People can talk all they want about making changes now for a better future, but this is the ultimate example of what is going to happen will happen. Literally, all we have is now, today. If I went to a doctor, got all the fancy treatments for Parkinson's, I would still die at age 61. There isn't a damn thing I can do about it. Above all, this is the worst thing anyone can ever dream of going through. You know why? When I have to double think now, I have to double think now. I have to try and pretend that life can be spontaneous. When I have a wife, I have to try and surprise her with a nice dinner, take my kids to the fair. All I know, all while knowing exactly how much time I have left. The spon, the spon, the spontaneity, the spontaneity of life is gone, and for the rest of my life, all 39 years of it, there won't be a surprise, something I didn't expect ever again. I could kill myself, but I can't because I already know that isn't how it happens. It's not that it won't work. It's just that I already know that it won't work, that I won't do it. I know how it happens. I never have to worry about getting robbed, getting in a fatal car accident, because that isn't how it happens. I miss those fears. You don't realize how much 100% safety sucks until you live it. At this point, it literally might be nice to wake up and worry about if I'll be in a car wreck today, just because it'll be something I wouldn't expect, but I expect everything now. It's clear to me now, more than anyone else on this planet can say, why time travel isn't a thing. People have been working on time travel for decades, but it's never come to fruition, or so we're told. I think time travel has been around for years, maybe centuries. Someone will always get curious and give it a shot, but they'll never say a word about it because they know. Imagine a world full of people who feel like I do, whose lives have lost all of the adventure, excitement, and challenges. There would not only be no point for each of us to continue living, but there would be no point to life of any type continuing. See, I don't know about that story because Like the conclusions that he came to didn't really make a whole lot of sense. Like just because he knew that he died then, why does that mean he has to try to surprise his wife? His wife doesn't know that he's going to surprise her with the dinner. I don't get that. And how, like, he knew things that didn't make any sense to me. You know what I mean? Like, how would he know, for example, how would he know that he wouldn't die any other way? How would he know that the future is set in stone? I don't know. It was a questionable story. So what's up? How's everybody doing? Haley, are you still here? Has anyone seen Jack? You can get this cool merch at the merch store in the description below. Or I guess I don't know where the description is below still. Yes. Yes, the description below. Yeah, I haven't seen Jack either, like all day today. I'm worried about him. All right, so this next story is called The Bottle, submitted by Zelkova8 on 2nd of June, 2015. It's an older story. I was only 12 at the time. I was playing in the scrapyard with some of my best buddies. My father was good at all different kinds of things, but flourished on vehicles and motorized machines of any type. He was always hauling in a new broken down truck or an old busted up washing machine, and had no problem with letting my buddies and me play in the scrap piles that lay in the backyard. We were out one day just messing around, shooting John's new BB gun, which he had just been given for his 13th birthday. We were all eager for our turn to shoot the beautiful Red Ryder, so we scrounged up some old cans from the bin my dad kept in the basement and started plinking away. A few hours later, it was starting to get dark, so we decided that it was time to wrap it up and meet again tomorrow. Dan, who was the smallest and most insecure one in the group, was having his turn with the gun and shot one last BB at the can. The BB flew right into the can, ricocheted to the left. It hit the front of the right window of an old F-150 that my dad had brought in last week. The window shattered. Dan could hardly comprehend what he'd just done. He stood there in shock, just staring at the window. I ran up to him and told him it would be fine, and that I'd take the blame for it. He looked almost to the point of tears, so I gave him a pat on the back and told him to get home. After apologizing about 50 times, he finally left. Bill, John, and Joseph followed soon after. When they were gone, I went to check on the extent of the damage done to the window. It was completely broken, shattered all over the seats and floor. I opened the door to see if the BB had somehow made it into the truck. I was scanning the floor, sifting through the glass, when I noticed a small cut on the upholstery of the right seat. I reached into the slit and felt something hard and smooth. I grabbed a hold of it and pulled it out in what appeared to be a small bottle of bubble juice. The liquid inside of the clear glass bottle had a slight purple tint to it. It was a neat find, whatever it was, so I kept it for tomorrow to show the guys. What's up, April? Tomorrow came, my buddies arrived, and I eagerly ran over to them. Dan came up to me first to ask how much trouble I had gotten into for the truck incident. I promptly told him what had happened and how my dad said he wasn't going to get much for it anyway. He looked relieved. Anyway, I said, guess what I found while looking through the glass on the floor of the truck? The guys gathered around in excitement. They all said, "What?" in unison as their eyes widened with curiosity. I pulled out the little bottle of juice and showed it to them. "What is it?" Bill asked. "I'm not sure," I replied. "I found it in a tiny slit in the upholstery of the truck." "I dare you to drink it," John shouted. "Are you serious? No way," I shouted. "Oh, come on," they all insisted. "It must be a shot of alcohol or something." couldn't possibly be harmful. Hey, hey, you could even get a buzz. Wait, what? Oh, hey, you could even get a buzz off it, I thought to myself. After looking at it questioningly, quest, questioningly, after looking at it questioningly, I began extremely I, being extremely susceptible to peer pressure, decided to open it. It smelled like nothing. I couldn't make out an aroma at all. There had to be at least some smell, I thought. I passed it around the group, and everyone else confirmed that it had no smell. Must be fine to drink then, said John, and he gave me a thumbs up. I looked into the bottle, closed my eyes, and downed it in one gulp. I woke up on the ground with all of my friends around me looking extremely concerned. Are you all right, buddy? Asked John. Yeah, I replied. Just a bit dizzy. How long was I out? I asked. Only 20 seconds or so, replied John. They held me to my feet as I swayed from side to side. I felt very disoriented and lethargic. I didn't want to play anymore, so we went inside my room. They hung out with me for a while, too scared to tell anyone what had happened for fear of getting in trouble. After a couple of hours, they finally had to leave. I decided just to sleep and see if I felt any better in the morning. That night, I had really strange dreams. I was floating in what appeared to be water in complete darkness. I couldn't feel any part of my body. There was a person floating just far enough away from me that I couldn't make out who he was. He was unnaturally pale, almost completely white. His whole body was extremely skinny, like he had no muscles at all. When I called out to him, he just turned his head slightly and looked to where I was floating. It felt wrong. Something wasn't right the way he stared at me. Then I noticed his eyes, or lack of eyes, I should say. He had large black holes where his eyes should have been. He then smiled. I wouldn't have been able to tell if his mouth hadn't been stretched across his whole face. He looked happy, almost euphoric. He started to inch towards me in the water, smiling that sick smile the whole time. I tried to turn and swim away, but I was too weak to move my limbs. I looked away in fear and tried to scream, but nothing would come out. I tried to curl into a ball so I would be smaller and less easy to see, but I couldn't get myself to budge. And then, all at once, there was complete darkness. I looked around me in the vast expanse of nothingness, but there was nothing there. I felt completely alone and empty. Then, out of nowhere, I felt a cold, dead hand touch my shoulder. I jerked my head around in pure fear. It was right there, staring at me straight in the eyes. I was able to let out a scream, and then everything disappeared. When I awoke, I saw that I had been perspiring a lot in my sleep. I didn't think it was possible to sweat this much in one night. There was literally there was literally standing water on my sheets. This is really starting to freak me out, so I ran to the bathroom to wash my face with cold water. I got to the bathroom and started splashing my face. The cold water felt so good on my dry skin. I kept splashing my face over and over again for almost 20 minutes before I could make myself stop. It just felt so good. All I could think for the rest of the day was getting into water, splashing my face again, or getting into any wet environment I could find. I ended up just filling the tub with cold water and sitting in it for hours. It seemed to be the only relief that I could get. Then the cough started. At first, it was just a small cough, one that one would use to clear out a mildly congested throat, but soon it turned into an awful hacking. I kept coughing until I started to cough up blood. I looked into the bathwater and noticed the dark red drops dissipating into the water. I stood up in shock, ready to cry. I ran outside, completely naked, instantly feeling the need to get in the water again. I ran to the lake that was located at the edge of our property and threw myself into it. It felt amazing. I was happy, happier than I could ever remember feeling in my life. I just floated peacefully on my back for a while until the coughing started up again. I came up to the edge and started hacking and sputtering blood into the ground. It was so much blood, too much blood. I should be dead already, I thought. I started to feel like I was going to throw up when something came out of my mouth with one of the coughs. It was pink and fleshy. I took a closer look at it and realized it was one of my tonsils. I fell back in horror as I began to cough even harder. I proceeded to cough up my other tonsil, everything in my stomach, and then my stomach itself. I was coughing up my insides, but how was I not dead yet? Shouldn't I be dead without my stomach? Maybe I am dead, I thought to myself. I started coughing up more organs, heaving and sputtering fluids and intestines everywhere. My heart was next, and my lungs. I almost laughed as I thought of the trite saying, what is it? Coughing up a lung? You may be wondering why I was laughing. Well, it didn't hurt. I felt nothing but wet, bloody organs sliding up my throat. I was so crazed that it didn't even seem real. Finally, I pulled the last of my large intestine out of my gullet. I was empty, completely empty, except for my muscles, skin, brain, and bones. I felt surprisingly calm, and then I blacked out as I slid back into the water. When I awoke, I was on the bottom of the lake. I felt extremely light, and my insides felt empty, but it was empty. I looked out into the murky darkness that I now call home. I could see very little from my spot in the lake, but I was happier than I could imagine. I don't know how long it has been, but I know it's several years. I haven't seen any other beings like myself down here, but I know they have to exist. How do I know this? Well, you see, I've started to secrete a liquid of my own. It's a light purple in color and much lighter weight than water. I found some old bottles and things at the bottom of the lake to keep a bit of it in. It's getting a bit lonely down here. I wonder if anyone will find one of my bottles and be foolish enough to drink it like I did. Some company would be really nice. That one was kind of weird. Let's see here. Am I going to read Jeff the Killer? Deal with the King. Balls to you 95 is the author of this one. There are times within a person's life when they will curse the limitations of their own human body. While it can perform many actions, there are moments when it is simply not enough. Have you ever tried to swim underwater for long periods of time? Perhaps you've been beaten senselessly by a hulking bully. It could be that you are late to your destination. Whatever the reason may be, I can guarantee that you wished you were stronger or faster, bigger or smaller. You may have wanted to change your appearance at will or have the ability to perform any other superhuman ability. For years, humans have had to rely on the progression of technology in order for them to lift extremely heavy stuff or arrive at their destinations hurriedly and the like. But what if I told you that you could gain these superhuman abilities for yourself? You probably wouldn't believe me. This seems reasonable. As a matter of fact, I would doubt your sanity if you did believe me. But for those whose sanity has slipped, there's a way to be granted with what you wish. The ritual to do so is not particularly difficult. No, the hard part comes afterwards. And those who have gone through with the ritual have never lived their life the same way again. The ritual begins with you locating an area in which you would be alone for miles. When you do find such a place, you must fall to your knees and repeat clearly the phrase, "Let it be known that I have forsaken the path of holiness," and call on to the King whose throne lies on the sea, twice. If the King has heard you, he will summon himself before you. He will command you to stand and will then ask you for your wish. You can ask him for whatever human augmentation you would like, but you can only pick one. Additionally, make sure you speak very clearly. The king will then inform you of the cost, the removal of a small fragment of your humanity every time the superhuman ability is used. He will then extend his hand. Sup, Sightless? This is an extremely crucial point in the ritual. The extension of the hand is his offering of a handshake. Now you can decide to withdraw from the deal, in which case he will inflict a large cut on your hand. The king does not like those who waste his time. Alternatively, you can accept the deal, in which case you are to shake his hand. Choosing the latter option will instantly grant you whatever it is you wished for, and the king will go back to his throne. This is the end of the ritual. Okay, good night, Haley. I love you. As mentioned before, at any point you activate your ability, you will lose a small fragment of your humanity. The smart ones tend to be very economical with their power usage as a result, or at least they start off that way. At some point, anyone who has an ability that surpasses that of other humans tends to end up abusing it. Even though it is through tiny fragmentations, their humanity withers away inevitably. There will be a time when the person with power subtly but surely morphs into a creature that represents their ability and their personality. But the person with power will not notice this, for they have fallen deep within the recesses of their own foul nature. All those people will know is how to use their power for their advantage. Before long, they will have completely mutated into a subhuman beast with no knowledge of who they are or where they came from. They will be slaves to their own power. The first ever case of this deal with the king occurred with a man who grew jealous of his brother's strength. These brothers were the great-grandsons of the man humans referred to as Adam. Furthermore, it is passed down through several books that Adam met the king who tricked him into eating a forbidden fruit. To this day, the king continues to make the deal with humans who seek power greater than they can handle, and they continue to transform into unknowledgeable creatures. You've probably seen one of them. There are parks called zoos that are dedicated to observing them in the habitat they've had to survive in. I think I've read that one before. What's up, Rainer? Still no Jack, huh? Interesting. The Tree Giver. Let me see if it's on here. The Tree Giver is not on here. It must be a Reddit one. Let's see if 1999 is on here. Here's 1999. This one's super small. If it's the same one. Welcome back, Paranormal Stephanie. I'm not too bad. Jack was supposed to be my special guest tonight, but he's not here. The year is 1999. Oh, wait. 1999. Written by Knox92. The year is 1999. That sentence brings me back to my senior kindergarten class when I was 5 years old, where we used to read out the date on the blackboard every single day. The year 1999 exists as a stain in my mind, however, as a memory that will not go away no matter how hard I try to forget it. 1999 marked the year I lost my first tooth, my first time on a plane, and unfortunately the early loss of my childhood innocence. That one memory that refuses to be wiped. It all started with the new or old TV that, at the time, Pokemon was the latest fad to hit the school. Pokemon cards, games, stickers, and the most popular, the TV show. So, of course, every time I came home from school, I would stay glued to the TV until Pokemon came on at 5. The only problem was that my dad watched the news at 5:30, and Pokemon episodes were back to back, which meant I had to miss an episode every day, something I whined on and on about. My dad got tired of hearing me complain every day. That must have been why he went and bought another TV. My dad put the TV bought in my room, and unfortunately, it was just an old, small boob tube with. Hold on. Boob tube with rabbit ears, even. It also only had 20 channels available, not including the channel Pokemon was on. I recall I didn't care, though. I was just thrilled I had my own TV in my room. After surfing through the channels, I came to the conclusion that only channels 2, TVO Kids, was worth watching, so I watched that for a while. Almost died in an inferno. How'd that happen? It wasn't for another few months until I discovered Channel 21. One day in April, I was flipping through the channels trying to see if Pokemon was on. I pressed Channel 21 into the remote, hoping there were more channels, and to my delight, there was. My dad was surprised too, but he let me watch because it seemed to have kids programs on it. The channel was called Cat Caledon Local 21. Later, I found out it was indeed broadcasted from the town of Caledon, Ontario, a town very close to my city. Hey, what up, Mr. Dark Reads? The show I saw in Caledon Local 21 looked poorly made. I never understood what was going on in them half the time. However, as I grew up, every time I thought of that channel, I realized more and more how messed up the shows were, and I had to ask myself, what the fuck was I watching? The following is a list of shows and episodes I remember seeing on Catalan Local 21. How I remember such detail even disturbs me. But I guess things like this stand out in your mind for a while. Welcome back, Drac. There were only 3 shows I could find on the channel. Probably because the channel was only operational between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. April 1999. Booby, Episode 6, Together. I recall Booby was a show where the characters were simply live-action hands, no puppets or anything, just hands. The show featured a hand named Booby who found himself in a new situation every episode. The show was only 5 minutes long, and it looked like it was shot in front of a damp, decaying wall, with the hands always on a table with a red tablecloth. Very low budget, obviously. This was the first episode I watched. The episode began with Booby trying to get ketchup out of a bottle. It actually showed him beating himself against the bottom of the bottle for a good 3 minutes. Finally, another hand came by and looked at Booby. Together, the other hand said, and they began beating the bottle as well until some ketchup finally squirted out all over the table. I chuckled slightly at this part. Booby then stared at the ketchup mess for a few seconds before turning towards the camera as it slowly zoomed in on him. Mr. Bear's Cellar, Episode 12. Very sketchy name if you were to look at it nowadays. The show featured a guy wearing a bear mascot costume who would get a new visitor around his cellar every day. It was always a kid. The show was filmed on a camcorder, and not a very good one either. The police asked me a lot of questions about this show. This episode started with Mr. Bear sitting at a table playing checkers by himself. I didn't recognize it at first, but the table was the same one from Booby. He sat there playing for a bit until there was a knock on the door. The camera was then looking up at the stairs at the door. There was another knock. Mr. Bear climbed the stairs and opened the door to reveal 2 young children. One was a boy about my age, and the other was a girl who looked about 8. Mr. Bear danced in delight, and then started talking to the kids. I couldn't hear any of them that well, I remember. Mr. Bear then led the kids into the cellar, which was quite dark, only lit by a small oil lamp on the table. I can't really remember that much more, except him singing a song, which I couldn't hear too well either, probably because of that large bear mask. The episode ended with them playing hide and seek, with the kids hiding in the closet and Mr. Bear counting. May 1999. Soup and Spoon. I don't think this was even a show. I think it was more of a special movie thing. All I know is I stopped watching Cuddly on Local 21 for a while because I thought this show was too stupid, especially since Pokemon now came out at 4:30 and 5. I don't remember much of this, but it showed a can of soup and a spoon, both attached to strings, swinging back and forth, as if someone was holding them and dangling them in front of the camera. Interestingly enough, the show was shot in a basement, which looked just like the one used in Mr. Bear's cellar. Like I said, I can't remember much. The only thing I can remember clearly was the end. The entire thing was only half an hour, and just included stuff I found. What? And just include stuff I found stupid, such as the spoon chasing the soup around trying to eat him, and the end showing a table, the one from the booby once again, and about 7 kids sitting around it, each with a bowl of soup in front of them. They were sitting, looking at the camera, but with confused, almost frightened faces. The cameraman then held up a can of soup in front of the kids and said, "Spoons ready!" And then it just stopped. July 1999. It was the summer, and I hadn't watched Channel 21 for a while. Until one day when I slept over at my friend's house, I decided to check it out again. My friend had gotten a TV in his room for his 6th birthday, so we stayed up very late. For us, 9:30 was very late, and watched TV. That's when I remembered Channel 21 and brought it up to my friend. We decided to see if it was on, and to our surprise, it was. They must have changed the broadcasting time. Mr. Bear's Cellar, episode 23. This episode was entertaining for my friend and I, mainly because it had swearing. However, now when we think of this episode, I realize something was definitely wrong when it was filmed. The episode started with the camera on its side while it was facing Mr. Bear, who was walking up the stairs to the cellar door. The camera then blacked out for about a second before fading in, back upright and facing Mr. Bear. There was also another kid talking to him, but this kid looked about 11 or 12. He was talking to Mr. Bear for a while, but I couldn't hear well again with the crappy camcorder until the kid started raising his voice. The kid was saying how it was late and how his sister had to go home. You could also hear more voices in the background. I remember Mr. Bear clearly saying, "Get the fuck out, you're not invited," with a deep voice muffled by the bear mask. I remember my friend and I looking at each other and laughing at the mention of the forbidden F word. But the episode got weirder. The kid began climbing the stairs before turning around and saying how he was going to call the police. Mr. Bear began breaking into a run towards the kid, who started screaming and running as well. The camera then cut out, and that was the end of the episode. The channel then turned to static shortly after. Booby, episode 42. Playing with scissors. One rainy afternoon, I was bored, so I decided to watch Channel 21. When I started watching, some show about a guy sitting in an armchair was just finishing. I forgot what it was about, though. When I first saw this episode, I thought it was for teenagers because it had blood in it. It was very gross. When the police told me everything, I now know who the blood belonged to. The episode showed Booby and another hand with a ribbon around the pinky finger. Booby's girlfriend. Booby was holding scissors and hopping around back and forth while his girlfriend slowly swung around aimlessly. Another hand shot in the seam. This hand was smaller, though, and was jerking around violently as if someone under the table was forcing the hand, and I later found out this was the case. "Scissors are very dangerous, kids, so hold them safely," Booby said to the camera. I noticed I could also hear muffled screams, but I wasn't sure where it was coming from because of the bad sound quality. Booby's girlfriend grabbed the smaller hand, which was thrashing about, and Booby went at it with the scissor. He started with the thumb. He opened the scissors wide and clasped down on the thumb. Blood began oozing out, and the muffled screams were now very loud. My 5-year-old self was very grossed out, and that's when I decided maybe Booby was a show meant for teenagers or grown-ups. Then the scissors got to the bone. A horrible crunching noise was heard, and that's when I turned the TV off. I never discussed it with my dad because I feared he would limit my TV time. August 1999. I didn't want to watch Channel 21 after that Booby episode. In August, I grew more curious to see Mr. Bear's Cellar for some reason, though. The last episode I saw of Mr. Bears was weird and had swearing, which made me think of the show was meant for teenagers. Nonetheless, I flipped onto Channel 21 when my dad was busy. Mr. Bear's Cellar, episode 28. Apparently, this episode had been playing the entire month of August. It was studied a lot by the police. The entire episode was just Mr. Bear sitting in a chair talking to the audience. Hello, kids. Do you want to visit my cellar? If you do, please write me a letter at this address. The screen then switched to a white screen with multicolored letters reading the address. And that was what remained for the rest of the episode. And guess what I actually did? I sent Mr. Bear, that sick bastard who betrayed him, a letter. I did it out of curiosity, mostly. My dad was okay with it because he thought it was a legit kid show. But then again, he never saw any of what was on Channel 21. So I wrote a letter using my best writing possible. I think I just said how I wanted to meet Mr. Bear and if Booby also lived in the cellar. So my dad sent the letter to the address Mr. Bear said on the show. It stayed on all day anyways for some reason. It took about a week to get a response, which I was surprised it did. I still have the letter I received on August 15th, 1999. The letter read, Dear Elliot, thank you ever so much for your letter. I would love to have you in my cellar. We play games, watch movies, and go fire camping in the middle of the woods. What's up, Jersey? And yes, Booby does live in my cellar. He's a good friend of mine. Come to my house, and the police cut out this address. Kendall in Ontario, California. Huh? I don't know. I look very forward to having fun with you. Love, Mr. Bear. I cannot believe my dad ever found this sketchy. Never found this sketchy because he actually took me to the house. And then that's when the police became involved. Those endless questions, those pictures of terrified kids, the woods. That brings me to why I'm writing this blog. That psycho and his friend did some fucked up shit to me back then. And now it seems that he's trying to get into contact with me again. The entire police thing is coming back. That has brought 1999 back to me over a decade later, and it's happening again. Update 9/21/11. People have been emailing me asking me what exactly happened in 1999. I'll get to that. Those weird TV shows I was watching apparently were meant to attract kids to Mr. Bear's house. What Mr. Bear did shocked the entire town. My dad actually drove me to Caledon along with the address Mr. Bear left on the letter. The house was actually in the outskirts of town in the open farmland. I still remember that house. It looked like an older farmhouse that looked to have been built in the early 1900s. The windows were all boarded up, and the house looked in a state of disrepair. As we walked up to the house, I remember my dad checking the address over and over again and looking at the house in disbelief. Then the door opened. I expected Mr. Bear to be at the door, but I was surprised to see a police officer emerge from the creaking doorway. The officer began talking to my dad while I quickly asked if that was Mr. Bear's house. The officer's face cringed slightly and muttered, "Oh, God," or something like that. He started talking quietly to my dad so I couldn't hear, although my dad told me to go to the car anyway, and then we just went home. My dad was quiet the whole way home. I felt something strange had happened. My dad never told me what happened for a while. I forgot about it anyway, too. Channel 21 no longer came on, and when I asked about it, my dad would not acknowledge its existence. I think it was when I was 13 where I had learned the truth. I remembered Channel 21 one day, and I asked my dad about it. I guess he finally decided I should hear the truth. Catalan Local 21 was a local TV channel that ran from October 1997 to August 1999 in the Peel region of Ontario. The entire channel was made from a house in Caledon, whatever, the one I visited, and run by a man who was not really known by anyone in the town. The channel was only available to older TVs because the signal was only picked up by the rabbit ears, weaker frequency. The man created all of the shows on the channel, all of which were kid shows. His hand was Booby, he was Mr. Bear, and he was the mysterious cameraman. The real reason he created the channel was more disturbing than what was originally thought. As you might have already guessed, he kidnapped kids and held them in a cellar. But while most people thought he was a serial child molester, he really wanted to use the kids for another purpose. The day I arrived, the man had fled his house on the night before. The day before the police went in for the investigation, I wasn't the only one who was watching. Update 11/9/11. Sorry for not answering any questions for so long. I haven't accessed my email account for some time. Anyway, let me finally set things straight about what I know. What's up, Sinatra? Back in October, I visited the house previously owned by the man who ran Keldon Local 21. 2 women lived there, operating a daycare business. How ironic. Now, to answer the questions you guys emailed me. Question: who else watched Keldon 21? Answer: I know other people watched it for sure, including those kids who wound up at Mr. Bear's house. After some Google searches, I found a few people on the Neo Seeker forums who were discussing shows from Keldon Local 21. They talked about the kids' shows I watched, but also 2 other shows I had never seen before. A user named I Am Real Life seemed to know all the shows that were broadcasted on Channel 21. Here are the 2 I've never heard of. The Fallen Angel and Life. I Am Real Life described it as a fairly boring show about a guy rambling on in front of the camera about how we must please Satan and appease him before it's too late. Paint with the Soul, I Am a Real Life, and another user called Siggy92 were discussing this show. They described it as Blair Witch-like, as it consisted of the cameraman wandering around a forest at night doing nothing particularly interesting. I'll go looking for the conversation and see if I can get the link. God, this goes on forever, dude. All right, I'm done reading this one. That shit goes on forever. Oh, it's just a bunch of updates. It is a good story. Not bad. It is like so freaking windy outside. Thank you, Sinatra. Oh. Yeah, let me backtrack here. And the infernal thing was my huge propane grill catching fire like Dante's Inferno, and my mother and I had to kill the fire before the already smoking gas line busted. I already got a severe second-degree burn from yesterday's cooking episode, so this was even more fun to have to deal with. Damn, Rainer. Win ASMR. Hello, everyone. I'd like to thank you for coming into Murder Monday. Do a little bit of ASMR. Got a raging storm going on outside. I'd like to know where Jack is. Like, what is going on, Jack? I really hope he's okay. I'm worried about him, guys. This is not like him. That's why I only use, like, a charcoal grill, and I only cook with wood. All right. This is a nice short story. It's called Star 69. What's up, Mandy? It's by Magic M. Back in the 1980s, there was a phone prank that my sisters and I used to do when we were kids. It was known around the neighborhood that if you were to dial your own phone number, replace the first three digits with 555, and then press the receiver down 3 times, the phone would ring back on its own. It had to be on a touch tone which were common back then. We did the prank whenever we were bored, waiting to see if our mother or father reached for the phone only to hear nobody on the other end. This sent us into huge laughs until one afternoon our mother yelled at us to stop messing with the phone. I remember this vividly because after she answered the phone, I saw her face drain of color as she looked over at my sister and me. Her reaction upon slamming the phone down scared us, and we promised never to play with the phone again. We must have done the prank a dozen times up until that point. The last time I attempted the phone prank was at a friend's house across the street during a sleepover. I picked up his phone and dialed 555-4127. I clicked the receiver down 3 times before I realized I just put my phone number after 555 on my friend's. Before I had a chance to do it over again, the phone rings and I pick it up for my friend, thinking it was a legit phone call. He answers, "Hello?" I can hear someone screaming back, "What did I tell you? You're fucking dead." My friend started crying and was so terrified and confused that his mother sent us all home. The thought of the phone as the thought of the phone as a dangerous thing suddenly became real. Later on that night, while I'm looking at my friend through the window, I see a man come up behind him. The light shuts off. It may have been his father. I wasn't sure. The next morning, I called across the street and got a busy signal. I walked over and knocked. Nobody came to the door. All the other cars were in the driveway, though. He should still be at home. I walked around to the back of the house to see the back door wide open. I can see that they're all in the living room watching TV. I enter the house. A voice is heard softly in the background. "If you'd like to make a call, please hang up and dial again." When I made my way to the living room, I saw my friend and his parents all sitting on the couch staring through me with horrible purple expressions on their faces, phone cords wrapped tightly around all of their necks. They tore the house down. Nobody would move in there. I asked my mother years later, looking at the empty lot across the street, about the phone call that made her yell at us that one day, and she told me all that she could hear was a man screaming in a very deep voice, something about tracing the call next time someone called this number. It sounded like a recording with all the static, but she wasn't sure. I did have some trouble reading Drak's story. Drak over here thinks he needs to write like Lovecraft at times, apparently. You can tell in the story that there were a couple of messy pastes going on there. What gave you chills? Bear Raider. All right, guys. I think I'm going to do one more story. And then since I don't have a guest, I guess I'm just going to have to call it, I suppose. It's kind of a bust for Murder Monday, since I had a plan and all. I didn't have any stories like, planned out or anything. All right, you have a good one, Mr. Dark Reads. This story is called The Wonder of Tubers by King Hades. What's up, Tetsuya? Ever since I was young, everyone has commented on the fact that I look just like a giant potato. Strangely, they've never considered the possibility that I am a giant potato. I was born in an abandoned thriftway, just 1 mile from a local nuclear meltdown. My skin was spotted with deep wet holes. Those Those were my wonderful ear tubers. During that time, I was quite content just listening. It was so peaceful. But then I sprouted my first eye tuber and saw how complex the world really was. I needed to explore it, but how? Limbless and round seemed impossible. Fret not, dear readers, for soon I would discover the miracle and majesty of tubers. With just 3 stout tubers, I was easily able to roll myself out of that place and onward towards adventure. Much later, I would encounter my first humans, a gang of children playing in some fields. I watched them, saw how they moved, propelling themselves on 2 legs and happily grabbing each other. When they left, I felt so alone. I wanted to do what they did, and soon I could. Once again, with the magic of tubers, I sprouted 2 thick appendages for legs and 2 long, squishy ones for arms. I stood 7'5", and it was glorious. When the children returned to play, I was ready to join in. They sure were surprised to see me. I chased them through the fields for hours. They cried and screamed, and I listened so carefully, and soon I was crying and screaming right along with them. We taught each other so much that day. They taught me the importance of companionship in this cold, cold world, and I taught them how to grow those wonderful tubers on their hands, their feet, and even their eyeballs. Big, gushing, bony tubers. They're still out there playing with their tubers. They've gotten so good at it that they barely look human anymore. All they've bothered keeping is their screaming holes, which they exercise constantly. I always scream back as a courtesy. So whenever I meet a human in some secluded place and they offer that same old comment in that same trembling voice that humans just seem to have, why, I just stretch my massive screaming hole as wide as I can and whisper, "Tubers." That's kind of a silly one. You missed a story about tubers. All right, I'm going to read another one. Screw it, I'll keep going. Why not, right? We got people's here. Ain't no sense in calling it. Oh, this is an anonymous one. This one is called The Affliction. Submitted by Anonymous. I hear them every night. The screams. It's always very quiet before they begin. Silence settles upon every single house and shop and person as all wait for the psychological plague they know is fast approaching. During the silence, it is as if for a moment our whole world comes to an ice cold standstill. Color and feeling in life leave us behind in a dark, horrifying void. And just when we think it'll never end, the sound of hell is released into the streets. But in a moment, the silence which echoes so loudly in the mind is replaced by shrill, pained cries that rip through the air, the mind and the soul like a knife. I used to cry and cover my ears when I was young and scared and blind. I would try my best to block out the sound, to convince myself that it wasn't real, to do anything to make the agony stop. However, over the years, I have come to realize that there is no escaping the merciless grip of reality. I now force myself to listen to what I know is the truth. It could save me after all. You see, these screams belong to a specific group. They are known as the renegade. They're the insubordinate ones who fight, those who refuse to conform, those who are not content with the lack of knowledge of the things that are hidden from us. Anything from speaking out against those in power to leading full-out rebellions against you into the ranks with the renegades. This is also what gets you into the affliction. We don't know much about the affliction. What we do know is that where those in the renegade are taken to be punished for their sins, we know it's where the screams come from, and we know that any sane person would never, ever want to go there. Its purpose has always been clear. They want to scare us, to make an example of what happens to those who try to go their own way. However, I don't think it has worked out the way they wanted. If it had, the renegade would have been stopped a long time ago. They haven't. In fact, I think they're getting stronger. There have been more rebellions. I've heard more whisperings of what could come to be if we just fought to make things better. However, how many times you got to say however, brah? The thing that has changed the most is the screaming. Every night of my life, I've heard the pained cries. They have always seemed the same to me. But now, as I stand in the streets and listen to the shouts of the renegade, I notice that there's something missing. They no longer contain fear. They're laced with something different, something I would never imagine they could encompass. Hope. I'm not quite sure why that's a creepypasta, to be honest with you. So how's everybody doing? I don't have a single freaking mod on here tonight, do I? That's preposterous. Whatever, it's all good. Everybody, if you could like, subscribe, share, and all that good stuff, that'd be awesome. If you'd like to support my channel in any way, shape, or form, there are links in the description below. I have a merch store where you can get fancy clothing and things of that nature. I also got a PayPal and a Patreon. And, all right, I'm going to read another story. Sinatra? No, bro. I already got mods. Just, I don't know where Jack is. He was supposed to be here. All right, you have a good one. Tree branches. Submission by Derelict Jenkins. Have you ever experienced the typical thunderstorm as your head lays sleepily upon your pillow as a kid? I believe we all have, many a time. Were you scared? I'm sure a good portion of you were. Of what, though? The gusting winds? The hammering thunder? The epileptic lightning flashes that seep through your window, blinding you as fear seeps into your mind from the unknown frenzy outside? Or maybe it's the tree branches rapping against your windows, watching the dark cast its aura, transforming it into a nightmarish silhouette of your worst nightmares. Your eyes transforming it to the worst possible thing, a monster. A monster with long, lanky limbs and a deformed, grotesque body. Sharp, red eyes piercing through your soul as it stares at you, tapping its large, pointed finger along the glass of your window, sometimes scraping at it, hissing at you as it stares at your feared form hiding under the covers, laughing as it watches you shake. You can only think of what it would want with you or do with you. Take you away, kidnap you, eat you even, digging into your flesh with its sharp, jagged teeth. Or maybe it's a bit more devious. It could tear you limb from limb and wear bones as jewelry. You're probably much too scared to think of the horrendous things the branch atrocity could do. But instead, you fall asleep as you wear your mind out and wake up to find only a healthy, beautiful tree staring at you from outside, dripping with water. Now, I thought nothing of it the time the next storm rolled in a few weeks later. I sat and watched TV aimlessly that Friday night, played my Xbox, and headed off to sleep, looking out the window, thinking something was missing. Something was off, but I shrugged it off and headed to sleep. As my eyes lay shut, it hit. Tap, tap, tap. The grotesque branch monster. I hid under my covers yet again, throwing the invisible imaginary invulnerability shield over me. I shook myself a bit and waited, and soon enough, to my pleasure, the tapping disappeared. I popped my head out, only to keep telling myself, it's only a tree, it's only a tree, as I attempted to fall back asleep. My eyes closed, and sleep fell over me until the tapping returned yet again. It was different this time. There was no sound associated with this tapping. It was a sharp tapping, one that occurs from physical touch. Physical, sharp, jagged pain tapping onto my side. I opened my eyes, tapping still sticking me in the side. I lay there in shock at the mass of tree branches sitting in my room. Its red eyes staring at me. Tree branches don't have red eyes, do they? Oh, great. Now Johnny's dead? This one was kind of like kid creepy, I thought. All tree branches have red eyes. I know, right? Actually, some of them got purple eyes. Don't be, don't be stereotypical. Okay. Well, good, Dustin. Actually, you know what? I am going to read. Where is it? I'm going to read this clown story that Johnny sent me earlier. Maybe. Let me look how long it is. Okay, yeah. This was written by K.G. Lewis 5 days ago. Oh, should I save it? All right, yeah. Yeah, I'm saving it. Forget that. Saving it for Jack, the guy that stands me up and says he's going to be my guest, but then, doesn't. No, I'm sure something happened. I'm sure he's busy or something. All right, this one is called The Growths. Another one by Anonymous. I'd had them ever since I was a kid. I can remember being incredibly self-conscious about them, hiding them in my pockets, under books and bags. Kids at school never said anything to my face, but I knew they were laughing behind my back. I remember asking my parents to take me to the doctor to get them checked out. The growths on my hands seemed to be the elephant in the room back then, since they'd just say I was fine and change the subject. But I knew better. I tried to remove them as a child, but without avail. Scissors, knives, potato peelers. Trying to cut or scrape them off was always a lost cause because I couldn't continue once the pain kicked in. But today was different. It's amazing how numb you can get with just a couple of tourniquets and a bottle of Jack Daniels. I was originally planning to use a sharp knife, but I figured that trying to slice through the tough flesh on the growths would be too arduous to my drunken state. I opted for the slightly more technological plan B. I had to hurry, though. I was already pretty lightheaded and was starting to feel dizzy. My hands and forearms nearly blew from the lack of circulation. I couldn't wait much longer, either. The whirling of the blender helped to put me in a sort of trance, ready to do what I had wanted to do since I first looked down at my strange deformities. I shoved my left hand in first. The immediate sensation of sharp blades slicing through flesh was jarring, but I was surprised at how well the alcohol was working. I expected it to hurt more. I could hear the sharp metal churning and cutting, working perfectly as planned. I pressed my hand down harder. All those bad memories, all of the embarrassment, all those horrible things were now nothing more than thick red pulp. Breaking from the feeling of ecstasy, I pulled out before blades hit knuckle. I smiled, taking a good look at my new hand. As for the growths, well, 5 down, 5 to go. Oh, see? Paranormal Stephanie's tree has blue eyes. All right, I guess I'll read this one. This one is called Petals. I think my cigarette went out. It was written by Shadow Swimmer 77. The bell on the door chimed softly as Joe entered the small flower shop. Sandra was pissed at him for working late again. She made that much clear when he'd rolled in past 10 last night. Who is she, Joe? Who is who? The woman you're screwing. What are you talking about, Sandy? You know I have I have the Brinkman proposal to finish by next week. It's requiring more time and effort than Bob anticipated when he signed us up for this damn thing. That's great, Joe. What about time and effort for me, huh? Remember when I used to warrant some of that? Sandy, I save it. Just forget it. I'm fine. I have a headache. She'd gone to bed shortly after that, leaving him to day-old takeout and late-night talk shows, wondering how things had gone so wrong. They'd grown up together, and Sandra was the first girl he'd ever really fallen for, right around the time most boys stopped viewing girls as vectors for their dreaded cootie virus, and instead as objects of vague worship and perhaps abject terror. When he nervously asked her to junior prom, he was surprised when she immediately said yes. 10 years later, through college and law school and marriage, they were still together, at least in a legally binding sense. Joe couldn't place an exact time when or how the hostility had crept into the relationship. But that was an old companion, a sort of abstract partner, and existential menage. And a sort of abstract partner in an existential menage a trois. She was right, though. Joe had been spending too much time at work lately, and she did warrant more than a late-night kiss goodnight and the occasional passionless bout of lovemaking when he managed to find the energy. If he was being honest, even those rare trysts were on the verge of becoming extinct, a concept 10 years ago Joe would have surely laughed his ass off at, as being outside the realm of possibility. The embers of their relationship may have died off from the raging wildfire it had been at the start, but there was surely something he could do to breathe some life back into the flame. That's all this thing needed, a little TLC and some good old-fashioned romance. So, flowers. The girl behind the counter looked up when she heard the bell. Her face flitted quickly from a smile to confusion to fear before settling on a smile again, perhaps a little more sickly than before. Hello, Mr. Sandoval. What can I help you with? Was there something wrong with your purchase? Joe was surprised. He had been in this shop before, but it must have been 6 months ago or longer. Probably longer, if he had to wager a guess. He couldn't be sure if this was the girl who had waited on him the last time, which made it even more impressive that she not only recognized his face, but remembered enough to call him by name. The girl was pretty, about 18, short brown hair and light dusting of freckles across her nose. He glanced at her name tag. No, Veronica. Everything was great with the last purchase. Totally fine, but you know how it goes. These darn flowers don't last forever. I seem to have found myself in some hot water with my wife, so I thought I'd take off from work a little early today and get an apology bouquet on the way home. She likes red roses. I remember, Mr. Sandoval. A dozen, like last time? Yeah, a dozen be great. And if you could make it up with some of the filler and bows and whatnot, of course, Mr. Sandoval. It'll be just a minute. She walked briskly from behind the counter into the cooler and glanced at him briefly over her shoulder before beginning to select roses from the bin. Joe frowned at her back, absently rubbing his chin. This was the oddest thing he'd experienced in a long time. Granted, a dozen red roses was a pretty common choice, but the girl must have some kind of photographic memory to keep track of individual customers' orders on top of everything else. Heck of a thing to waste as a clerk at a florist shop. He looked down and noticed a small drop of red on his hand from where he'd touched his face. He must have cut himself shaving this morning and reopened it accidentally. Veronica finished selecting the flowers and brought them over to another table. Joe noticed her hands were shaking as she arranged some baby's breath and staggered roses before trying the whole bouquet off with a red bow. She returned to the counter. That'll be 30 even, Mr. Sandoval. Credit again? Yeah, credit, that's right. Joe fumbled to pull out his wallet out of his pocket and find his visa before handing it over. It was maybe a little harder than it should be because of an odd bruise across the back of his hand. Where had that come from? She swiped the plastic on a little device next to the register and handed him the bill and pen. Here you are, sir. Please sign here. Thanks. Joe bent to sign the receipt. Say, if you don't mind me asking, how do you remember so much about me? I mean, my name and what flowers my wife likes and everything. He glanced up to see Veronica had taken a step back. She was standing rigid, arms straight and hands by her side, a look of confusion on her face. What's the matter? Mr. Sandoval, are you all right? What? Yeah, I'm fine. Look, are you still worried about the flowers from last time or something? It was 6 months ago. The girl's confused look turned into one of fear, her lips quivering. Mr. Sandoval, you were here maybe an hour ago, and there's something on you, all over you, something red. Eyes wide and threatening to overflow with tears, she began edging sideways towards the telephone on the wall. I think I need to call the police. What? No, don't. That can't. I just, I've got to get home. Picking up the bouquet, Joe headed back towards the entrance of the shop. Just sorry for scaring you. He tripped through the door, bell ringing angrily, and ran to his car. Practically throwing himself into the driver's seat, he sat there for a moment, dozen thoughts whirling around in his head. What Veronica just said was impossible. Joe had no idea what the hell all this was about, but he knew he had to get home. Get home to Sandy to save their relationship. He could make everything all right if he could just get home. In a daze, he put the car in gear. He pulled into his driveway just a few minutes later. The winter sun was already well on his way to setting. Shadows from the branches of the trees in his yard began being thrown along and sinister as he stumbled out of the car, gripping the flowers. The mental fog he had driven home in was abruptly lifted, replaced by a sort of double vision, a living episode of deja vu. Joe saw things both as they were now and as they were at some previous time before. It must not have been that long ago, because although the light in the sky had not yet begun to die, in the vision of before, the black truck he didn't recognize was still parked at the end of the driveway. Making his way up the walk, he noticed that before Joe carried flowers in his hand, much the same way as now Joe did. The front door was opened ajar, now where before it had been closed but not locked. Entering and making his way down the hallway, dodging the strewn piles of clothing that had been there before, Joe was struck by the quiet emptiness of now. Before there had been noises of talking and laughing and other things. Now the hallway was dark in the gathering night, where before the sunlight had crept through the shaded windows and thrown patterns across the floor. The bedroom door was cracked open now, as it had been then. From the time he entered the house, the vision of before had been gradually shifting to shades of crimson. Now, reaching the threshold of the bedroom, the perspective was completely distorted, as if someone had dumped a bucket of blood over before Joe's head, then abruptly cut to black. Left to one viewpoint, Joe felt his shoes cling to something sticky on the floor. Looking down, he could see a dark stain that had spread across the carpet where he was standing, punctuated here and there by petals torn from a bouquet strewn on the corner of the hallway where it had been dropped. The dying light was too dim to tell, but he knew they were red. Sandy? He whispered her name as if a prayer. Only silence answered. Oh, snap. She was cheating on him. All right, guys. I am going to call this one. So I hope you all have a splendid night. Thank you for hanging out. Thank you for listening to me read. And I'm sorry that I couldn't have a guest on this week. I planned on it. But I hope you all have a splendid night. I'll probably talk to some of you soon. See y'all.